I have often wondered why it is that if I and you were to come by a lion on a track in the forest, that we're going to immediately take to our heels and run off crazily. And we are most likely not going to be able to outrun the lion. Or some people may even go into a state of freeze and just collapse. That might even serve them better. But my wonder is, why is it that a Masai Mara, somebody from one of the regions in the east of Africa, Kenya, when confronted by a lion whilst taking a walk in a forest, armed with nothing but a very long and fragile stick, instead of taking to his heels, will begin to jump up very high with the help of his stick and begin to scream crazily, and he keeps repeating that action until the lion turns around and walks away. Why is it that he takes that action? He doesn't panic and begin to run, knowing that he cannot outrun the lion, or he doesn't go into a freeze state or something like that. But he does something that is extremely intelligent. It is actually because the Masai Mara have learned how to calm the amygdala and prevent amygdala hijack. Welcome to our talk for today, and our topic for today is calming the amygdala or preventing amygdala hijack. I hope you've watched our previous video on the neurophysiology of stress, because that will help you understand this discussion better. Now, the amygdala is a part of our reptilian brain, the part of the brain stem, and the function of the amygdala is to preserve our existence. So the amygdala is the one that perceives any threat, anything threatening our lives, and then springs into action to ensure that our existence is preserved. The amygdala also functions in controlling our emotions, and a number of other functions. But our concern today is about its functions in preserving our existence. It's the amygdala that kickstarts the fight or flight reaction, the stress reaction, and it kickstarts this reaction each time it perceives a threat. Now, there are some important things we need to note. One of it is that whenever the amygdala swings into action, it hijacks the brain. We call that the amygdala hijack. Why is that? Whenever it swings into action, now other centers of the brain that are not concerned with this response, the stress response with preserving our existence, they are shut down or prevented from functioning maximally. So each time the amygdala hijacks the brain and kickstarts the stress response, your prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's involved in carrying out executive functions such as planning, such as decision making, another critical reasoning function, either functions at a very reduced state or it stops functioning. It doesn't function maximally. Also, the hippocampus, the part of our brain that's involved in making memories, will also function at a highly reduced rate or not function at all when the amygdala hijacks the brain. Have you ever wondered why it is that? Perhaps you were holding your car key in your hands and something made you angry and you got into an argument. Whilst you were arguing, if you drop that car key somewhere, by the time you're done with the argument, the anger is gone, you begin to look for the car key. You cannot remember where you dropped the car key because whilst you were angry, the amygdala had hijacked the brain. Your hippocampus, the part of your brain that processes memory, was shut down. So your memory was not being processed and filed properly. So you don't remember where you dropped the car key, and it has to take a while for you to find the car key. It happens to us a lot. Or there are other times when the amygdala hijacks the brain. Just imagine that you're in a hurry to get somewhere, you're late for this very important board meeting, and your mind is already, creating imaginary situations of what will happen because of your lateness, and you get into your car to drive. Now, there's a particular route you take to your office every day, and your brain is accustomed to that route. But this time, this board meeting is not taking place in your office. It's taking place in a client's office. But when you enter your car and begin to drive because you're crazily anxious about getting to the venue of this meeting and your amygdala is in control of your brain. You get into the road and begin to drive, and then it gets to the place where you would have driven, taken a turn for perhaps to the client's office. You do not take that turn because your brain is operating on autopilot. You take the route that you're accustomed to and you find yourself landing in your office. You were late and you were anxious, but instead of going to the client's office, your autopilot has taken you instead to your office, thereby making you waste more time. That's if you even get to your office, because it might even lead you into having an accident. That's why it's really important that we are able to checkmate the amygdala, that we are able to calm the amygdala, that we are able to prevent the amygdala from hijacking our brain, especially when there is no physical threat. Now, the amygdala and the amygdala hijack and the stress response and the fight or flight reaction, all referring to the same thing, is very important when there's a physical threat. For instance, when you're faced with a lion or a human-eating tiger, when there's a real threat, or there's a snake or there's a fire in the building and the fire alarm goes off, these are instances of real physical threats. Now, in these instances, the amygdala kickstarting the stress response is very important. When the stress response is activated, a lot of things happen in our bodies that make us prepared to face the threat, to either fight the threat or to take flight very quickly. And this is important to preserve our existence. But what happens when this stress response is activated wrongly? When this burst of energy is made available wrongly, but there's no physical threat for you to run from, and there's nothing for you to fight, and you have this burst of energy, what happens? There's nowhere for this energy to go. So when there's a real physical threat, you perceive this burst of energy as a burst of energy that helps you fight or flight. But when there's no real physical threat, you rather perceive this burst of energy as anxiety, and it's not good for you. And when this inappropriate activation of the stress response happens often, or when the stress response is activated and is sustained for a long time, it leads you to having a high allostatic load. And this leads you to be at risk for a number of diseases, including Alzheimer's and dementia, because it leads to thinning of your brain cells in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. So it leads you to be at risk for Alzheimer's disease. It sets you up for aging faster, and it sets you up for depression and anxiety and a lot of other diseases. So it's important that the stress response is not activated wrongly, and that you learn to prevent this inappropriate activation. You learn to calm the amygdala and prevent it from hijacking your brain inappropriately. Now, when is the stress response activated inappropriately? The stress response is activated inappropriately in the situations of psychological stressors. So when you're worrying over something that's happened in the past, that's rumination, you're activating the stress response inappropriately. Now, when you are worrying about the future, when you're multitasking, doing a lot of things at the same time, when there's a situation of insecurity and you're perceiving that as a threat to your existence, job insecurity or some other kind of insecurity, you perceive that as the stress response, and that's an inappropriate activation. When there's unhealthy competition, when there's envy, when there's you have this perfectionist attitude, you're also activating the stress response inappropriately, and all of this will lead you to be at risk for serious physical and psychosomatic diseases. Now, there are two states in which your brain can operate. It can operate in the active state when you're paying complete attention. That's one state, and that's the state that your brain should always operate in because it's good for you when you're paying complete attention in the moment. That's one state. Or it can operate on autopilot when you're not really paying attention, when the amygdala is hijacking the brain. Those are the two states that your brain can be: the active state or the attentive state, or the inactive state or the inattentive state. And this inattentive or inactive state is to the brain what lack of exercise is to the body. Do you get the drift? Okay, so When the brain, there was a research that was carried out in the brains of young people, when the brain of young people were operating at autopilot or the inattentive state was scanned, when an fMRI, the functional magnetic resonance imaging, was carried out on the brains of people who were inattentive, young people who were inattentive. They found their brains to be similar to old people suffering from Alzheimer's disease. That's how bad inattentiveness is for your brain. So let's talk about calming the amygdala or preventing amygdala hijack. Now, for you to be able to calm the amygdala, you must be able to recognize the signs of the stress response, and this might differ from person to person. How do you experience stress? For some people, they experience stress by trembling. You see yourself trembling because there's all this burst of energy and nowhere to go. Your body begins to tremble. Some people, you notice the increased heart rate. For me, usually I will have my heart in my mouth, literally, because when you are stressed, sometimes you take those shallow breaths that feels as if the air is not really getting into your diaphragm. It's just stopping somewhere up there. So it's like your heart is in your mouth. So you begin to notice yourself breathing, fast. This increased heart rate, your heart is beating fast, you're breathing, taking short and shallow breaths. That could be the sign for you that your stress response has been activated. Or is it paleness in your skin? Is it a full bladder, suddenly? So when you know the sign of stress activation for you, is it perspiring in your palms, perspiring heavily in your skin? Now, if you want to know all of the signs of the stress response, you have to watch our last video. When you've identified what the stress response is like for you, now, each time you see that the stress response is activated, you must take steps to practically calm the amygdala. And one easy way to do that is by taking deep diaphragmatic breaths. You take a deep breath, count from about 1 to 3, and then you exhale slowly with your mouth open, counting longer exhalation, counting from 1 to maybe 5, and you do that repeatedly for 3 to 4 times. This activates the vagus nerve, and that's the nerve in the parasympathetic nervous system that reverses the stress response. So each time you find out that there's been an activation of the stress response inappropriately, you can quickly take these deep breaths, and this will help you calm your amygdala and stop the stress response and reduce your risks for cardiovascular and other psychosomatic illnesses. Now, how can you prevent the amygdala hijack? A number of things you can do to prevent the amygdala hijack. One of them is regular practice of mindfulness, meditation. Now, in the past, I, like you, was averse to mindfulness practice. I thought it was just for spiritual reasons, as the Hindus do or something like that. But research has shown that there's massive, research in support of the effectiveness of mindfulness in preventing stress and in coping with stress. So it will be good for you to start a daily mindfulness practice, if possible, or to just learn to be present, to pay attention, be fully present in every moment of your life. That's one way to practice mindfulness. That's what I learned, and that has transformed my life. Now, we're going to do another video to teach you how to start your mindfulness practice. But mindfulness is one big way of reducing stress, of preventing amygdala hijack. What are other things you could do? Now, stop multitasking. Rather than multitasking, you can learn how to effectively switch attention from one task to the other. In the past, we thought multitasking was a sign of strength. No, it's a sign of weakness because it activates the stress response and puts you at risk for diseases, both mental health diseases and physical diseases. So please stop multitasking. Now, perfectionism is also not a positive threat because it leads to stress. So stop being a perfectionist. You have to recognize the fact that you are human. And as long as you are human, you cannot always be perfect. Sometimes celebrate the effort you've put in and the mileage you've gained instead of seeking for everything to be perfect. Now, if you learn to plan ahead of time as well, if you learn to plan ahead of time, you will be able to prevent stress to a large extent. Imagine when running and, running for a meeting. If you had planned your day well ahead of time, you would not have to rush because you would be right on time. Having sufficient sleep. Now, this one is huge. Inadequate sleep predisposes you to stress and amygdala hijack. So having sufficient sleep, eating a healthy diet, engaging in regular self-care, taking care of your mental and physical health, and taking sufficient rest will help you prevent amygdala hijack and prevent stress. Also, having a great social support network, friends, family that support you and that you can rest with, that will also help you prevent amygdala hijack. Now we have other videos that can help you learn more about this. But until I come your way next time again, I wish you an amazing week ahead. Please subscribe to the Psychologist Andy channel, and so that we can continue on this journey of keeping healthy together. Have an amazing day. Ciao.